I'm finally gonna tackle a project that I've been thinking about for a while now, and it's high time that I get it out of my head and onto plywood. Or, make it a reality. I've been really into this idea of merging my love of painting with my newfound passion for woodworking, and I've been getting a lot of inspiration lately from other artists out there that are doing this mixed media painting, wood collage style art. Now I want to take this idea and mix it with my very own art style to create a really beautiful piece of wall art. And I have this idea to add LEDs to it that I think will make the piece just a real showstopper. Hey, my name's Elena and welcome. Today I'm going to be walking you through the process of how I created this wall art, and I'll show the final results at the end. At the start, I wasn't exactly sure how it would look, but I did know that I wanted some type of mountain landscape on a horizon line. I definitely needed to work it out further, so I got to sketching. When I was getting my degree in graphic design, I had a teacher in one of my classes that made us go through rounds and rounds of sketches before we would narrow down. She had a very strict rule that we had to have at least 50 sketches before we could stop. At the time, I remember internally rolling my eyes at this rule. I had a great idea for my logo at sketch number 5, so why would I waste more time sketching out other ideas? But she was completely right. The number 50 at the end of the day isn't that important. Even now, I don't always sketch out 50 ideas before moving on. But what is important is the takeaway that you need to work through all your ideas and explore every avenue if you want to create something that really stands out and is ultimately the best solution. It's only by producing a bunch of mediocre ideas that you can start to get a sense of which ones have real potential. Kind of like sifting through a muddy river bottom to find a couple nuggets of gold. More times than I can count, the best idea ended up being sketch number 28 or 52, and for this particular project, I landed on the concept I knew was the one at sketch number 34. Now that the sketch is done, I'm going to start drawing it out on the actual plywood. I'll use some paper templates to ensure that how the mountains are layering looks correct, and although I have some measurements on this sketch as a general guideline, I'm going to mostly just eyeball it and see what looks the best. I went to my local hardwood store and picked up a couple sheets of birch plywood. I chose this type and thickness of plywood because it would keep the piece on the lighter side, which is important if I'm going to hang it on the wall, but it would still have some pretty wood grain that hopefully I could get to come through whatever color stain I use. To help ensure that the mountains would layer in the way I had them layering in my sketch, I created paper templates. This was super helpful in checking to make sure there was enough buffer between the mountains and that everything was just sitting correctly. After I was done with that, it was starting to get too late to use my jigsaw. We live in a townhouse, and I try to be respectful of our neighbors. So I went ahead and set everything up so I could start cutting the next morning. I debated between using the jigsaw or the bandsaw, but decided to go with the jigsaw mainly because the pieces I'm working with are rather large and unwieldy, and I didn't think it'd be the easiest to maneuver around the bandsaw, especially when I'm still new to working with it. And honestly, I'm just really comfortable working with my jigsaw. Plywood can easily splinter when you're cutting it, and to avoid tear out, I decided to test a few different blades on the corner of the plywood sheet before I made the actual cuts. The two blades I tried out were the Bosch Clean Wood blade and the Bosch Extra Clean Wood blade. Both actually worked pretty well with minimal tear out on the underside, but the clean blade was on the thinner side, so I thought it'd be better suited for all of the tight curves that I'd be cutting. I often find in woodworking there's dozens, maybe even hundreds of different ways to get something done. And it often comes down to what resources you have available, personal preferences, and what will get the work done most efficiently while still being safe. It's one of the big reasons I enjoy it so much. You're constantly problem solving and challenging yourself not only to get a better result, but to improve the path it took to get to that result. I feel like I walk away from every project with a bit more understanding of how to do it better next time. To get the straight cut for the bottom of the mountains, I set up a fence with another piece of plywood. Overall, the jigsaw cut easily and smoothly through the plywood if I kept it moving along at a medium speed and pushed it at a steady pace. I was really feeling good with the progress that was being made. The following day, I sketched out the back layer of mountains using the template I had created for the front stack as a loose guideline. And I was continually checking throughout this entire process to make sure that the mountains were going to stack and layer in the way that I wanted them to, before going ahead and cutting those out as well. So now that I'm done with all of the cutting, I'm gonna move on to sanding, and then it'll be time to apply some color. I hand sanded the pieces down to remove any splintered material and round off the edge of the cuts. I had already gotten one splinter at this point, so I threw on some gloves to avoid more while handling the pieces. Before I put any paint on the actual cutouts, I decided to test first on a scrap piece. I watered down some acrylic paint, as that is a really easy way to get a color stain on wood, and tried out different ratios of water to paint. Next up, I decided to mock up the pieces as a little gut check to make sure I was just liking how it was all looking. I still needed to trace out the circle for the sun piece, so I got out my favorite circle tool, the kitchen mixing bowls. Unfortunately, even the largest one wasn't quite the size I wanted, and the compass I had on hand was broken, so I looked around the house for another circle to trace, as I was really trying to avoid making a run to the store. And I remembered I had a skeleton of a stool with a perfectly round top and bottom that might be the perfect size. And luckily, it was. I wanted to paint the piece so that the circle sat on the furthest back layer, but the mountains had an implied line through color that continued the circle onto each layer of the mountain silhouettes, which would create the overlapping contrasted shape effect that I wanted to come through in the final art piece. I went ahead and painted one of the pieces using the watered down acrylic method. But once I was completely over the full piece, I just wasn't feeling how it was turning out at all. So I decided to switch methods and add a slow dry medium to the acrylic paint that would thin it out and give me more working time before it started drying. The results turned out so much better, and I was very relieved that this worked out. Once the base color was done on the cutouts, I started strategizing how I would create the soft color fades that I had in my sketch. I could just paint them on with a brush, but I really wanted them to have more of a seamless, soft airbrush feel. And since I didn't have an airbrush, my next best bet was to get some spray paint. I decided to go with Rust-Oleum because it's really easy to get at the store. It's always been my go-to. It's not too expensive and it comes in a lot of colors. I was a bit nervous about this part since I had painted a bunch of the cutouts with transparent paint. If I messed up with the spray paint on a piece, I'd either have to paint over the whole thing again and lose that transparent effect, or I'd have to just start all over. Since I really wasn't familiar working with spray paint, I started with some scrap pieces to get warmed up before moving over to the main pieces. With each one, I masked the area I didn't want to get paint on with shop towels and masking tape, which worked really well. Once everything was dry, I pulled off the masks, and at this point, I was starting to get really excited about how it would all come together. I cut down a piece of scrap wood into small sections that I would use as a spacer in between each layer of the mountains. I tried to be as careful as possible, making sure that the implied line of the circle was lining up perfectly on each of the layers, and once everything was set up the way I wanted it, I let it dry overnight. I reinforced a couple of the spacers with screws in areas they wouldn't be seen in the final product, and finished attaching the rest of the mountains together. At this point, I brought out the LEDs that I planned to attach to the back of each layer and tested them out to make sure that they were all working. Once all the individual pieces were connected and fully dried, I took out the strip of LEDs and carefully placed it along the backside of each mountain cutout. The LED strip had a sticky back, so that made it relatively easy for attaching. It was looking a bit messy in the back, but as long as you couldn't see it from the front, that didn't really matter to me. I hope you enjoyed watching the process, and let me know what you think of the final piece in the comments below. If you like this video and you want to hear even more about my art process and watch me paint one of my landscape paintings, then go ahead and check out this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.